So I'll start with the tradition of the dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. Okay, so last time in the last lesson, I talked about the argument of contingency and necessity. So imkan al-wujud and wajib al-wujud. And that I think is a nice argument, by the way. Then I talked about the argument of causality, and these are some important arguments to have, intellectual arguments, rational arguments that provide a good firm basis. Maybe to each person, different arguments may provide more of a firm basis. One may make more sense to someone else than another. So it's really, what really is made more sense to you, Okay, so the next one, this one is called Burhani Huduf. Now, this argument of Huduf, um, this is same like Hadith. We have narration, reports, but here in theology, and this is an important point, I probably brought it up before, that when we're looking into different sciences, we have a literal definition and then a technical definition. So whenever you go into a science or a topic, make sure that you define or find a definition of what is being talked about. Because when we use the word huduf over here, or hadith over here, we're talking about something different than when we're talking in ilm al-hadith, and we're talking in the science that talks about the riwayah. So, and similarly, if we're in linguistical studies, dictionary studies, we're going to have a slightly different, we're going to have different definition here. But it's somehow connected in its meaning, but we have a technical definition and a literal definition. So you can't always look at a science and compare the two. You have to see if their meaning is the same in the words. What their meaning in there is, the concept, is the mafhum, the understanding, is it the same as being applied with the same word, or is it a slightly different detailed version? So the argument of huduf, or we could say the argument of occurrence. Now, some translate it as contingency, but contingency is imkan. I think occurrence is more appropriate over here. This is an important argument which is brought in the science of kalam, of the science of theology. And it's been described in different forms. So this is an argument that you find with the theologians. You have some arguments that you find with the philosophers and the theologians. You have some arguments that maybe the philosophers incline more towards. Then you have some arguments that maybe the theologians incline more towards. So you have different things, and then you have some who maybe don't present much arguments at all. Like I don't know if you've ever heard of Tafkik school of thought. They're against somewhat against the logical things, and they're against philosophy and things like that. They argue based on fitra mostly, which is another argument. And fitra is something we can bring, but I had left my studies of their theology after spending some years doing so. But anyways, so the
My chef.
argument, yes. So okay, so this argument of huduf, that gives me something because I didn't prepare next week's lesson yet, so that gives me something to put there. Okay, so this argument of huduf is an important argument brought in the science of kalam, and it has been described in different forms. So sometimes you have arguments, and sometimes they're described and used to approach that argument or that result, some different methods or some different ways that people may approach it. Like we have this famous argument, Burhani Siddiqeen. I don't know if you ever heard about this argument, Burhani Siddiqeen, the argument of the truthful ones. And this argument has many different forms, because the philosophers, they wanted to seek an argument where you proved God's existence from existence itself without referring to any of the creation. So they have different forms of this argument to try to seek that aim. So there's many different versions of this Burhani Siddiqeen. So over here, there's some different forms of this argument of huduf. Now, this argument of huduf is, like I said, is more of a theological argument. But a version of this argument is as follows. So here is a logical syllogism in front of you. This is a qiyas. We call qiyas in logic, not the type in fiqh. The type in fiqh is not allowed unless we know the cause of the ruling. So, like we have hadith that says the cause of the ruling would be a good example. But over here, qiyas means syllogism. Syllogism over here is totally different than what this word qiyas means in fiqh. Qiyas in fiqh means tamthil in logic, which is comparing two particulars and then have taken their common point and saying this is now the judgment on it. Qiyas in logic syllogism is when you go from the universal concepts and you produce a result. So you have in this syllogism, and this is what you do. You study in logic and in Mantiq, you study all the rules till you get to this level of how to present proof. And this is the most important things is you learn different ways to present your proofs, and you bring some true propositions, or you should bring some true propositions, otherwise your argument can be refuted. Then you present them in a certain form with certain substance to them, and then you produce a result. So this is a syllogism in front of you. You have a premise one, a premise two, and a natija, a conclusion. So here, what we do is we have this subject and predicate, and we have a common term in between the two premises, and each premises has a subject and predicate. So not to get too much into logic for you, but just to explain what we'll do here. I'll walk you through it lightly. So premise one, the universe is hadith. Universe is, what we mean by hadith is something occurring after its non-existence. So it didn't exist, then it existed. So the universe, this is the first premise, is occurring after its non-existence. That's the first premise. The second premise is anything which is occurring after its non-existence is in need of a maker, is in need of one who makes it occur. So now we can say anything which is hadith, which is hadith. This is English, anything which is occurring after its non-existence is in need of a maker. So this is a logical conclusion to it. Anything you have the universe is occurring after its non-existence, and anything which is occurring after its non-existence is in need of a maker, or one to occur, it may cause it to occur. So anything that is in need of anything which is occurring after its non-existence is in need of a maker. So that would be the result of this argument. So that is one argument. Now, each one of those premises are proved, right? Like you go and the universe is occurring after its non-existence, then you go and investigate. Okay, you observe in a different premise, has a different premise behind it, and reach this result that the universe is occurring after its non-existence. Then anything which is occurring after its non-existence is in need of a maker. Things don't occur by themselves. So these all had prior arguments and levels. Then we got to these two premises, and we produced a result. So this is how this kind of thing kind of works. So the first premise here is akli, is intellectual and obvious, axiomatic. Ilmu batihi. This is something which is not requiring thought process. Sometimes there's things that we know, but they don't require a thought process to them. We just know them. Like, I know that I exist. My I-ness is axiomatic to me. It's obvious. Hence, those who deny the existence of Allah should reasonably accept this premise, because it's an obvious premise, as it is an extension of the principle of causality. So the principle of causality that we said before said that every effect needs a cause. So here we see the universe is an effect, and this is kind of obvious thing. Okay. However, if we want to prove this second premise, so what was the second premise? Second premise is anything which is occurring after its non-existence is in need of a maker. So if we want to prove this second premise, we can make another syllogism, which is as follows. So this other syllogism will be like this. The universe is changeable and alterable. Okay, you could observe this. The universe changes, it alters, it has this kind of feature to it. Second premise is anything which is changeable or alterable, it's able to be altered, is occurring after its non-existence. Therefore, the universe is occurring after its non-existence. So the universe, since we see change, we see change and corruption, things fade away, things are temporal, things are affected, things get altered, things move, things grow, things die, things come to life, these kinds of things. The whole thing is in change. It's in a kind of motion of change. And anything which is changing, which is changeable, able to be changed and alterable, is occurring after its non-existence. Prior to that existence of that change did not exist. So when you see change occur, that change is telling us that change has occurred after the non-existence of that change, and that is what the Huduth is. That's exactly what it is. Therefore, the universe is hadith, is occurring after its non-existence. So as for the second premise, this also is said to be axiomatic, obvious. And it can be known by thinking and reflection upon the reality of change itself. So maybe, it's obvious, but maybe sometimes our attention gets lost to it. So it can be known by thinking and reflection upon it. You could go, like I said, you go reflect on the change and the alterability of the universe and the things that you're observing. You see the change itself, and then you see that this is occurring. So you could think upon it. You could think on examples. I was once not here, now I'm here. All these different things. So that is, since Huduth means coming into existence after being non-existent, and anything which is changeable and alterable has no stability, and any condition of it was preceded by non-existence, and hence its occurring being, it's the fact that occurrence is happening to it, and for something to occur to it or to occur in itself, it requires something to cause its occurrence. Principle of causality. Okay, something was there, and before that, it was not there. Something wasn't there, and then it was there. For that to happen, it requires a cause, because a thing cannot cause itself to be when it doesn't even exist. Just like I said in the arguments about causality. We can't say that these things which occurred caused themselves to be when they didn't even exist yet. How could they cause themselves to be when they don't exist? Because they don't exist. And if you say it's an endless chain of occurrences after the non-existence, well, then we have an endless chain. And we'll have to say that whole endless chain is contingent. It needs a cause. So you could go back to the same kind of arguments from those that were mentioned in the last lesson on this one. So Bertrand Russell, he poses an objection over here. He says that the law of physics on contingency of the universe as incorrect to cite as a proof of the existence of God. So he says that the law of physics on contingency of this universe is not correct to cite it over here to prove the existence of God. So what kind of response can we offer to Bertrand Russell? What can we say to his claim? His claim is based on a positivist view of epistemology. Epistemology is kind of a newer field in Muslim studies, especially like in the Hausa. You probably find traces of it throughout history, but as a separate science and a separate discipline, this is a newer newer topic to be devoted to have like a whole course to. It's the study of knowledge. This is where you study what knowledge is. What are the sources of knowledge? What types of views about knowledge are false and arguments against them. This is called the science of epistemology. And sometimes this may be presented like in one of the philosophical books, is presented as a kind of a prerequisite lessons to first philosophy, one of the modern textbooks. So here, his view, his claim here is based on a positivist view of epistemology, meaning that his view is based on the principle of sensory acceptance of reality. So this is the idea that for something to be real, I have to sense it through sense perception. What I know to be real is only what I sense through sense perception. What I taste, what I see, what I hear, what I touch. That's how I know something is real. So this is the principle of positivist epistemology. And so meaning any idea which cannot be tested through experience or experiment has no scientific value. So these people hold this epistemological view. They will believe that anything that we cannot get through our five senses is having no scientific value. No scientific value. There's no value scientifically to them. And is unacceptable. They believe this is unacceptable. However, the basis is also rejected by contemporary philosophers. Contemporary philosophers of science reject their basis of sense perception being the only source of knowing reality. And one of the biggest mistakes and errors in the principle that the positivists have is that knowledge which is not the product of senses and cannot be tested and experienced by sense perception does exist. We are subject to and we have knowledge that we don't get through sense perception, like dreams. When we have dreams, we may taste, hear, smell, feel things even in a dream, but we're not using our body. That's not coming through our ear, our nose, our eyes, nothing like that. So with this perception of it is happening in the soul. It's not coming through sense perception externally. It's happening in the soul. It's happening to the soul. So this is a type of knowledge which we have that doesn't come through sense perception. Another example of something that doesn't come through sense perception, I-ness. Like that flying man theory I said that Ibn Sina had. If you were to take away all the five senses of somebody, they would still realize and know that they themselves are there. They would obviously, self-evidently know that they are there. They would know their sense of I-ness. That I-ness is not something we see outside and then comes through our ears and our eyes, and then now we know that I exist. We know that I exist because we are experiencing I-ness in ourselves without sense perception. Without sense perception. So the principle, also another one, is the principle of non-contradiction. Two things cannot be the same thing. And, they cannot contradict each other. Principle of non-contradiction. This is something that we know in ourselves, where that thing itself, that principle of non-contradiction, doesn't actually exist as something externally that we sense. We don't sense this principle of non-contradiction. We see things, and then if they contradict, we have this in the mind, this thing of principle of non-contradiction. There's another example that is given against their claim. Or the law of causation, causality. We realize this whole idea of causality, but this principle of causality outside is not something that we're, tangibly grabbing a hold of, and we say we see the principle of causality. We see effects and we see causes outside, but inside we have knowledge that isn't sense perception. So we have something additional to the things that we're realizing outside. All of these things, now each one of these things have to be gone into in depth just briefly, but all these things can be proven to be true things. Hence, human knowledge can be from sources of various different places. The knowledge that we have has various different sources. Sometimes it's akli knowledge. Sometimes it's through sense perception. Sometimes it's through illumination. Sometimes it's through wahi. So we have different types of knowledge that we can obtain, and different sources that we may get that knowledge through, that Allah has made, Allah has put here. So it's not only through sense perception, it's through different various ways. So sense perception is only one of those ways. It's only one of those channels of knowing things. When we see things, when we taste things, we know it. If I eat pineapple, I know what pineapple tastes like. If I eat banana, I know what banana tastes like. I got that through sense perception. If I have an intellectual idea, I have an akli idea, universal idea, I understand that thing intellectually. If I have my I-ness, I understand that thing in my consciousness, in my soul itself. So there's things that we know that are not through sense perception. And by the way, the soul is the akal, and all these things is all like, together, but our minds, we split things and we have to analyze things, and it's just the soul is a world itself of amazing masterpiece. But anyways, so sense perception is only one of these things. Others are rational and revelation and things like that. You have wahi, you have rational knowledge, akli knowledge, and all those types of things. So his claim here is having is built on this positivist view of epistemology, and that view of epistemology, that knowledge is only scientifically valuable if you get it through sense perception, is faulty. Why? Because there's things that we know that are not gained through sense perception, that are not due to sense perception. And these things have tremendous scientific value. They have tremendous value to human souls as well. Like I-ness is an importantness. If somebody lost their I-ness, they would be in severe distress. If they didn't know that they exist, they'd be in complete, they'd maybe be mentally gone because they're not realizing their I-ness, even though their I-ness is there. Maybe they got some kind of mental problem or something. But all these things are important. The principle of non-contradiction, the principle of identity, the principle of the law of causality. There's many things that we gain without sense perception. So there's other ways. Sense perception is only one of the ways. So there, I think, is where I should end this lesson, because we got 3 minutes left. Inshallah, next week we'll continue with the next ones, and then we'll talk about, after the next ones, we'll get into the fitra, intrinsic nature ones, inshallah, before we move to the next topic of the class. Well, after Dawana and Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We have like 3 minutes, so if you have any questions, brother, you can feel free.